Russian missiles have hit the Ukrainian region of Odesa. Officials there said at least 17 people died in a series of overnight strikes fired from Russian aircraft. Missiles hit an apartment building, killing residents and sparking a fire. Rescuers were searching for people buried in the rubble. Another missile hit a nearby recreation center. Though Russia has intensified attacks on Ukraine in the last 2 weeks, it has just withdrawn from the strategically important Snake Island south of Odesa. That may make it possible to restore sea access to Odessa's port. DW correspondent Emmanuel Chaz is covering developments for us from the Ukrainian city of Odessa. Earlier, I asked her about this latest missile strike in that region.
Well, this missile hit a residential area, I would say, once again in Ukraine. This is near Odessa, and at the time we're speaking, there's already 17 people which have been found dead. There's over 30 people injured. Among the dead, you have one child. Among the people injured, you have 4 children and a pregnant woman. The emergency services, the first responders, they're still on the scene. They're still searching the rubble to find more survivors. This is just another day with just another attack on civilians in what seems to be indiscriminate shelling, in spite of Russia continuing to say that it does aim at military targets.
How vulnerable, Emma, is the Odessa region? Is Ukraine in a good position to defend it?
Well, first off, Terry, you know, Odessa city is a port city. So it's by the sea, by the Black Sea, where a lot of missiles are being fired. You know, the reason why you don't see the sea behind me right now is that we don't have the authorization to film it, because Ukrainian authorities are so worried that, this might lead to Russians finding targets. It just shows you how worried they are about any attack that will come this way. And because we're directly by the Black Sea, well, Odessa is more vulnerable because there's a shorter, range between the missiles and the targets. So it leaves all the southern part of Ukraine pretty vulnerable. And the past few weeks and last night as well have shown just that civilians are very much vulnerable. Last night it was in Odessa, a few days ago it was in Mykolaiv. There's really nowhere that feels safe in Ukraine, especially in that area.
Now, this attack came soon after Russian troops withdrew from Snake Island, just south of Odessa in the Black Sea there. Tell us more about that.
Well, it's interesting because, of course, Ukrainian armed forces, this was very important for them. This was an island that was taken on the very onset of the war, and it was a huge blow to the morale of Ukrainian troops. Then there was, those border guards, Ukrainian border guards, who had told the Russian warship where to go, and it had become quite legendary here and quite a symbol of Ukrainian resistance. So the fact that Ukraine has a hold of Snake Island is very important symbolically. It's also very important strategically because it gives them back control of part of the Black Sea, which they had before the start of the war. But of course, this is really a defeat and a resounding defeat for Russia. So maybe those strikes came as retaliation, but we cannot really tell because every day there's more shelling, upon civilians here in Ukraine.
Emmanuel, thank you very much. That was our correspondent, Emmanuel Chaz, there in Odessa, Ukraine. NATO has wrapped up its summit with a tougher line on Russia and a promise to increase its troop presence in Europe. At the gathering in Madrid, NATO also officially invited 2 countries, Finland and Sweden, to become members of the military alliance.
Pomp and pageantry in Madrid. Leaders of the 30 NATO member states have tightened ranks against Russia.
And an attack on one is an attack on all, and we will defend every inch of NATO territory. Every inch of NATO territory. For our part, the United States is doing exactly what I said we would do if Putin invaded. Enhance our force posture in Europe.
NATO agreed on a new strategy, ending any pretense of partnership with Russia.
In fact, NATO is a defensive alliance. It does not attack other countries and has no intention of doing so. It is not a threat to anyone in its own neighbourhood. In fact, it is Putin who has made imperialism the goal and the object of his policy.
While some members have announced new deliveries of weapons to Ukraine and additional military funding of more than €2 billion, Kyiv says it's simply not enough. The Klitschko brothers, who've represented Ukraine here in person in Madrid, warn that Ukraine's fight is a fight for Europe.
Wake up, guys. This is happening now. You're going to be next. This is going to be knocking on your door, just in the blink of an eye.
NATO is also set to grow, with the Turkish veto against Finland and Sweden joining having been ironed out. Vladimir Putin is warning he'll consider sending ballistic and even nuclear weapons to Russia's border with Finland once it joins NATO's ranks.
Everything was going fine between us, but now there will be tensions, there certainly will. This is obvious and inevitable, I repeat, if there is a threat to us.
NATO also drew up plans against what it sees as coercive tactics by China. The leaders will meet again next summer in the Lithuanian capital, Vilnius.
DW Brussels Bureau Chief Alexandra van Namen has been covering the summit for us in Madrid and much else. Alexandra, massive changes underway within NATO. This is not the same alliance it was just a year ago, is it?
Well, that is totally true, of course, and I think that the goal here in Madrid was to send a strong signal of unity, to show that the alliance is ready to tackle the problems, to address the new threats, and be united. So the leaders here were able to manage to agree on a new strategic concept for the next 10 years. They were able here to also welcome Finland's and Sweden's bid to become members. They are ready to agree to for them to welcome them as new members when the whole process is over. However, we also have to say that there could be trouble ahead after Turkey has lifted its veto against Sweden's and Finland's membership. The Turkish president here now said that they could still block the whole process if the two countries are not meeting their expectations and, for instance, extradite terrorist suspects with links to outlawed Kurdish groups, and that is, of course, up to the courts to decide. So there could be trouble ahead, but for now, NATO is sending the signal that the alliance is united and determined to address the new threats.
Alexandra, what about the alliance's support for Ukraine? Can Kiev now be assured that NATO has its back?
Well, I think that NATO is very determined to continue supporting Ukraine, and US President Joe Biden told us here in Madrid that NATO is sticking with Ukraine as long as it takes. However, he couldn't answer the question, what is the outlook here? How long is this war going to last? And that is, of course, a question that is on the mind of many people in Europe and in the United States, because, of course, supporting Ukraine is one thing, but sanctioning Russia is also not painless for Europe and for the US when we see what's going on, inflation, soaring prices. So everyone here is aware that the longer the war drags on, the bigger is the risk that the support for Ukraine could dwindle.
Alexandra, thank you very much. That was our Brussels Bureau Chief, Alexandra van Namen, in Madrid. The Czech Republic takes over the European Union's rotating presidency today. Prague is vowing to focus on the war in Ukraine and its repercussions, including refugees, energy insecurity, and keeping the 27-member bloc united against Russia. DW's Christine Munwa reports from Prague.
There's a changing of the guard at the European Union's top leadership, with Paris handing over the rotating presidency of the EU Council to Prague. Because war has returned to Europe, the Czech Republic's tenure at the helm will be a hard one.
We are preparing ourselves to take over presidency in a time where inflation is very high, when war is so close to us in Ukraine, and Russian aggression against Ukraine is, of course, a main topic for all of us.
The Czech Republic has welcomed nearly 400,000 Ukrainian refugees and provided significant financial and military aid to Kiev since the start of the war. Within the EU, it is a vocal supporter of sanctions against Russia. But the Central European country, like many others on the continent, is heavily dependent on Russian energy, and there are serious concerns here about how secure that supply is.
Energy security is an important topic right now, and our dependence on Russia is huge. For us, it's a really enormous dependency on Russian gas and oil, and we have to find a solution for all of us, but the Czech Republic knows that this would be possible only with solidarity of all EU countries.
But EU countries are increasingly drifting apart on how to respond to Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
People I've spoken to here in Prague favor continued support for Ukraine and a hard line on Russia. They say this country's history, being occupied by the Soviet Union, has a lot to do with it. But the sentiment isn't the same across the Union, and so a big part of this presidency for the Czech Republic will be to keep the EU united going forward.
Some say that the timing of the Czech Republic's presidency is an opportunity for the country to act as a mediator.
It's great that we have Czech Republic as a presidency country now because, you know, they are the perfect fit for this job. If there's a country that can actually try to find a consensus on the situation and the position towards Russia, it could be Czech Republic. You know, when we look at France, France is a very dominant country, and it sets its agenda in a way that this is what we want and please get on board. Czech Republic will be more of a country that opens the dialogue.
With no signs that the war in Ukraine is anywhere close to ending, Prague will be tested on its ability to keep EU countries in lockstep over the response to the worst crisis in Europe since the Second World War.
And DW's Christine Mundwa, who filed that report, joins us now. Christine, the Czech Republic wants to use its EU presidency to rally support for Ukraine and keep the pressure up on Russia, but is it clear how they plan to go about doing that?
Well, Terry, within the European Union, it includes the integration of Ukrainian refugees across member states, a coordinated plan to make that integration a little bit more official and more successful. Outside of the EU, it is the continued political and humanitarian support for Ukraine as coming from the European Union, and a plan that the Czech presidency would like to work on, a post-war reconstruction plan for Ukraine.
Now, your report points out that there are divisions within the EU over Ukraine. Tell us more about those divisions.
Terry, at the last EU summit, European Union's leaders took the decision, the historic decision to grant Ukraine candidate status, and the unity around that was celebrated, really. And it's not questioned in terms of how unified European Union leaders are when it comes to support for Ukraine. The issue becomes on how to deal with Russia. That's where you start to see the fragmentation, if I can call it that. You have certain member states who want a very hard line on Russia. Others are calling for the diplomatic channels to be kept open. Going forward, the European Union is going to have to impose more sanctions, for example, on Russia. And we've seen how difficult it's been getting under the French presidency of the European Union. The European Union was able to impose 6 rounds of packages on Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. And we saw how difficult that was getting with different interests as it pertained to energy dependency, relations and closer ties with Moscow. For example, the Hungarians who say enough with the sanctions. It's now time to get to diplomatic conversations. So that is where the issue will be. But the Czech Prime Minister's people have a lot of faith in him here and his ability as a patient negotiator. He currently leads a coalition government with 5 parties. He's been able to hold the peace there, so to say. So people are really confident in his ability to also use the Czech Republic's historic relationship with Eastern European countries to bring everybody into the fold and have that consensual dialogue that will result in coordinated action from an EU perspective.
Christine, thank you very much. DW's Christine Mundwa there in Prague.